I'm Dr. Craig Farney.
I'm Dr. Kyson Frank.
And we're here to talk about mold.
Ew. Are you under attack from a hidden army? Is there an adversary in your life that's fighting you and your health? If you are, how would you know? How would you know if they can't find it when you do your blood test? Is there something that's hiding in your house, on your animals? Is there something that's attacking you and robbing you of your peace and your life and your joy? Since the dawn of man, we've always had the need for water. And with water comes the potential for mold growth. And so it's been a fight that's been going on for eons between our bodies, our immune systems, and the mold that grows in the environment. Mold's a great recycler. It takes organic material and it recycles it down into basic components to be used again by other plants and other animals as they grow. I don't care if you live on the top of a Fifth Avenue penthouse or if you live in a cave somewhere else that you have water trickling through. Mold is always going to be prevalent and be an issue. And this is something we really have to look for and we really have to find if it's the actual hidden cause of your disease. So the war kind of escalated. Back about 1916, something was invented called sheetrock. And before that, everything was built out of stone, wood, and lath, which wasn't great sources or material for mold to grow on. It needed a better medium than that. And sheetrock was invented. It wasn't very popular. It was considered very cheap, and it didn't really take on much customer base until after World War II, when there's a sudden huge growth in the housing market, and it was the easiest way to build houses very quickly and effectively, and so drywall became in favor. So by the 1970s, almost all construction was done with drywall. Now the thing about drywall is, as long as it stays dry, you still have a wall. If it gets wet, you're in trouble. Drywall has paper on both sides, and the paper on the back is a little more rough. It's kind of almost like kindling for a fire. It's a perfect medium for mold to really take off and grow on. And this is why we're starting to see this stuff starting to build up. There's mold that's been hiding in houses for generations that's been kind of inert or it's just slightly growing there. And so it's something we really have to look into as we look into your health. So now I want to talk about sick building syndrome, or SBS. This is such a big issue that even architectural magazines and digests are actually talking about this issue with how they build buildings, because of the water damage, how water accumulates and creates mold. And these buildings that have been invested in with millions and millions of dollars are now actually buildings of mass destruction. These water damaged buildings can lead to all kinds of health issues for people working in these office environments. Some of the things that people understand is a lot of these different things can be brought in from home and propagated in these environments where the water is out of control or the moisture is not handled correctly. So like any day and age of humankind, water always has to be handled correctly, or else we can end up with a lot of dangerous mold. So when we deal with mold, we have to look at risk assessment. This basically is, even though you have maybe a minor exposure over prolonged periods of time, can have the same effect as a major exposure in a short period of time. So even though you're only getting a small exposure to it, or even though they test the building, it only comes back a minor amount, if you're there 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, year upon year, this can start to have a profound, slow, insidious infection into your body that can lead to a lot of shadow diseases. So mold can infiltrate our workplaces because one of our coworkers or our boss or somebody else can have a mold issue at home, and those spores can actually cling to their clothing and they can bring it to the office environment. Or worse yet, you may be bringing it from home and exposing all of your coworkers. So mold and mold spores, they wait patiently. They can sit there hiding as a spore shape until water comes in contact with them, and then they can proliferate and start an entire attack. So you can have mold that's accumulated these spores in your environment, your workplace, your home for long periods of time, and then they come in contact with water and they start to proliferate, and then now you have a disease process that's starting in your body. So we've discussed before, mold has a very specific role in the environment. Its job is to go through and break things down to the basic elements before they can be recycled in the world that we live in. Mold is very similar to yeast, but as a multicellular branching mechanism versus individual or bicellular nature that yeast has. So mold needs three things to survive: dark, damp, cool places. So the old saying is, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So I need heat, light, and air circulation to fight this off or to clean this up. The problem with mold spores is they're like everlasting seeds or time bombs waiting to be deployed with the first chance of contact with water. It needs a temperature of over 500 degrees Fahrenheit to actually burn these spores out to kill them. So if you have a huge infestation in your house, you might actually have to burn it down sometimes to actually clear out all the spores. So we have to fight it in different ways. I read an interesting article about scientists who have actually collected spores from fossils and were actually able to activate them just with water. so they do hang around for a long period of time, and it takes a lot to get rid of them. So you may be wondering, how can mold actually be affecting me in my life? Well, there's some surprising ways that mold will be infiltrating your life and your home. Right now, people are buying all these front-loading washers which have these big baffling seals around the front. Well, any type of mold spore that gets on your clothing or on your garments, anything you wash in there, can get caught in there. And most people don't realize that they actually have mold growing inside of this baffling, and they don't take their seals off and clean them. So what happens is this mold keeps growing, keeps producing more spores, and keeps infiltrating it and soaking into their clothing that they have and they're wearing. And this is how they take it to work with them. This is how they share it with their friends, whether they want to or not. So all these tumblers like Yeti cups and everything are all the rage right now. Most people don't realize that right now there's a rubber seal around the lid there, and if you don't take that off and clean underneath it, any type of organic material, anything you're drinking out of there besides water itself, can start growing mold. And that could be a real issue, because now you're actually putting all of your other drinks in here. You're actually putting these mold spores directly into your body with what you're consuming. If you have these cups at home, I challenge you to go peel the seals off and see if there's anything growing underneath there. Even worse than that are sippy cups for kids. These are notorious for growing mold in the little valves and everything that are supposed to keep them from spilling. These things need to be taken apart and cleaned thoroughly, or better to try to avoid them altogether, because they can lead to a lot of sicknesses in kids. So all the rage right now, people are trying to be healthier, they're trying to get away from nicotine and getting away from cigarettes. Well, they're all going to these e-cigarettes, and a lot of these vaping pens and vaping products have actually been found to have mold and mold spores in them. And so you're inhaling them directly, and you're directly poisoning yourself with these things, not even to discuss all the other risks involved with e-cigarettes. But this is a major way that it can be infiltrating into your life, into your lungs, which can affect your breathing, your energy, how you function in your life, directly from just using e-cigarettes. Mold is prevalent everywhere, even in space. We have problems with mold growing on the space station. Interesting enough, the mold can grow on the outside of the space station, and the ionizing radiation from space can't even kill it off. It'll thrive and grow in that. Matter of fact, they actually found mold that's growing in Chernobyl, where we had a nuclear disaster, and they're actually finding that the mold is adapting and growing to the radiation there and actually absorbing it and eating it. They're actually finding that mold actually has the ability to clean our environment, even radiation, because it will adapt to this and it will pursue cleaning this product up and helping recycle everything in the environment. So mold is a very strong adversary that we have to learn to deal with in many ways.
So let's talk about a few of the common culprits. First, we have Aspergillus. Aspergillus, interestingly, was actually named Holy Sprinkler, or means Holy Sprinkler, because of the way it looked when it was discovered in the early 1700s. Aspergillus spores typically affect those who are immunocompromised or have lung disease, and it creates an allergic or lung infection. And it's typically a gray or black color. Second, we have Cladosporium, which is a olive green to brown to black color. And this typically creates either an allergic or an asthma reaction. And then finally, we have the most well-known, which is black mold, which is Stachybotrys chartrum. It is the primary mold agent found in building-related diseases such as water building syndrome or sick building syndrome. So let's talk about mold's three-prong attack. First, you have the allergic mechanisms, which arise from inhalation of the mold spores, leading to atopic asthma, hypersensitivity, pneumonitis, allergic bronchopulmonary aspergillosis, and allergic fungal sinusitis. Then we also have toxicity. Your level of exposure is a big factor in your level of sickness. The longer you're exposed, the sicker you'll become. And finally, we have the infectious process, which can not only affect the lungs and the sinuses, but also the brain, the joints, the muscles, and the lymph nodes. But let's discuss another really important aspect when it comes to mold toxicity. A really interesting study was done in Switzerland. They took a mold culture and put a Faraday cage over it, which blocks all electromagnetic frequencies and radiation coming into the mold culture. They measured the level of biotoxins for several days, and then they removed the Faraday cage, which allowed the mold culture to be exposed to all the electromagnetic frequencies and radiation within the room, like Wi-Fi, electromagnetic frequencies coming off of appliances, and then they measured the level of biotoxins again. Amazingly, the level of biotoxins increased by 60,000%. That's 60,000% or 600 times more levels of biotoxins than was there before. That's like one day you're fighting 1 to 2 soldiers, and the next day you're fighting an army of 600 soldiers. Not only that, the biotoxins that were released were more virulent, more viscous, which means they're more sticky or do not wash away as quickly, and they were more poisonous. So how does that apply to us in the real world? Over the last 20 years, our level of exposure to electromagnetic frequencies has exploded. From cell phones to cell towers, we are exposed millions of more times to electromagnetic frequency and radiation than we ever were before. To give you a number to kind of contrast this or explain this, in 2015 there were 308,000 different cell towers. That is more than double the level of what it was in 2002. And now with 5G it's even worse because they use smaller, more closely packed antenna that emits radio frequency radiation stronger than we've ever been exposed to before. If you could actually see this radio frequency radiation, it would look like smog over downtown Los Angeles. So not only do we have an issue with EMFs, but there are other things that can increase mold's proliferation as well. Dr. Kyson's already talked about how mold can adapt to electromagnetic fields and areas of radiation. Another factor that can impact mold is what's called radon. We even had an example where a gal was in our office and she didn't realize, but she actually had radon in her foam sandals that was magnifying or increasing her level of mold toxicity within her body. Once the shoes were removed, her level of mold toxicity reduced, and the amount of treatment she needed was significantly reduced as well. In a similar way, when we talked about Lyme being the great mimicker, mold is a great pretender. It will hide itself or present itself like many other conditions such as fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, anxiety, PTSD, and you can see from this list many, many more. So how do we protect ourselves from mold? First, we want to deal with water. Water is a vitally important issue when it comes to mold. This is why our levels of humidity are so important. Ideally, we want to keep those humidity levels below 50%. Air conditioners and dehumidifiers are really good at removing this vital resource from mold and prevent it from growing. This is especially important during the humid and rainy seasons, depending upon where you live in the United States or around the world. Areas in the house that tend to have a higher incidence of moisture include the kitchen and the bathroom. So we want to make sure these areas are well ventilated and moisture is reduced. Things like mold preventing paint is important, as well as mold cleaners. Another important factor is carpet. Carpets in bathrooms are a big no-no. Finally, if there's been any flooding or water damage, you definitely want to have all the padding and carpeting removed by an expert remediation team. So how do we win the war? While remediation can be quite costly and expensive, the toll that it can take on you mentally, emotionally, and financially is even greater and can have a huge impact on your future. So removing mold from your life completely is a little bit more complicated than just remediation. If you're still suffering from allergies or toxicities or infections related to mold and you're frustrated by your lack of progress and you would like to find a health center that understands the war you're fighting and knows how to win the war, at DocereLife Center we help patients fight this war all the time and would be glad to help you not only fight the war but win the war. When fighting a war, it's very important to have allies. At DocereLife Center, we've had a lot of success helping people win the war against mold, and we would be honored to ally with you and help you win your war.
If anything that we've discussed today sounds familiar to you and you want to investigate further, please call us. We'd love to be your ally.